Good morning. Welcome to day 9 of our morning time together. Today we're going to be in Genesis 23 and 24, and these chapters are really kind of eye-opening as far as the faith of Abraham again. We see Sarah passes away at the beginning part of our scripture today, of what we're reading and pouring into in chapter 23, and obviously it was a time of grief for Abraham, and in scripture here, it's just not a matter of the grief of losing his wife. He kind of struggles a little bit because he has no land. He was told by God to go, and he's been kind of wandering around, and he doesn't own any physical land. God promised him all this land, would be theirs, but at that moment he had nowhere to bury his wife even. So, compile losing his wife, let alone knowing, where am I gonna bury her? And then he goes and he barters and figures out, a piece of land that they're going to do. And it's amazing because the people there were just going to give Abraham the land. And they said, you're mighty amongst us. Go pick out whatever you want. And Abraham basically said, no, I'm going to pay for what I get. And he bought it for 400 shekels, which is about $1,000. And he got a cave, because that's where they really buried their dead back then. And he took care of business. And after that, he was contemplating his future. You have to start thinking about when you lose a loved one like that, then your own mortality. Where are we? Here's Sarah, 127 years old, it says she was. So so that means Isaac's 37. He's getting old already. That means Abraham's even older, obviously than Sarah was. So he was wondering, okay, what happens to my son now? I got to make sure that he has a wife. He's going to get married. God promised me, a certain amount of things that were going to happen as far as populating the world and being a father of many nations. How's that going to happen if my son's not even married and not having kids yet? So he sends his servant out. We see then, and he goes and again, here's God taking care of Abraham, who's faithful, because the servant he got to the well with the camels that Abraham sent off with him, and he pretty much not really bartering with God, but he wanted a sign that he knew that this woman that was going to come forward was the right one, and he was praying for that, because if he failed, Abraham said, "I'll remove you of your oath." But as we look at this, we see him say, Lord, when I ask this woman for a drink of water, she's not only going to give me it, but she's going to offer to water my camels. And before he even got through making his agreement, whatever it is, with God, Rebecca shows up and she says, you know what? He says, can I have a drink of water? And she said, yes. And I also will water your camels. Well, this guy must have just got knocked off his chair, and figure out this. She's the right one. He puts a gold ring in her nose and some bracelets and stuff. He ends up going to the house and telling the story, and that's so important even to us to tell our story, to give witness and testimony, and that's what was going on here, and they agreed to send Rebecca off with him, and that's how we end with chapter 24, as she gets to where Isaac is, and they become husband and wife at this time. So there must have been some great relief for Abraham, even for Isaac. Obviously there wasn't a lot of choosing, with who he was supposed to marry, and here's Rebecca, and things are looking up now. Then we'll be going into Matthew 7, and Matthew 7 is a continuation of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from chapter 5. It began as Jesus taught on judging other people. The lesson that we get is the way one judges others is the same that will be judged. And the Lord then talked about having the freedom and humility to ask and seek and knock for the things one needs, what one wants and one desires. And if we don't ask and seek and knock, we don't receive or have doors open to us. And that's a lot of what we're hearing about in chapter 7. Just stepping out again in faith, like Abraham was, to be willing to knock, be willing to ask, be willing to seek. And chapter then transitioned as the Lord spoke about the straight and narrow gates. The straight and narrow leads to life, but the wide, broad that leads to destruction, where far too many people choose. And that's, you being here in the mornings, reading Scripture, going through that. It tells God, it shows God that it also demonstrates that you're anxious to be in that narrow gate. Really, in other words, if a lot of people are thinking it's probably a pathway to destruction, because we're set apart. Scripture says to be sanctified, to be set apart, to do God's work, and Jesus warned the people not to be misled by false prophets. False prophets come like wolves dressed like sheep, and the Lord and know a tree by its fruit. An evil tree will produce evil fruit, and good tree will produce good fruit. And one should always be able to tell a false prophet by his or her fruit, their deeds. And another big teaching point Jesus taught on this chapter were false followers. In fact, not everyone who calls on the name of the Lord, it says, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Those who will enter are those who do the will of the Father who is in heaven. So, in other words, there's two types of people. Jesus foretold that one day of judgment, many self-proclaimed followers will claim that they have done many good works in the name of the Lord, to which the Lord will respond to them, "Get away from me, I never knew you." That's always been a harsh scripture. That there's people out there that really they talk a good game and they walk a good game, but their heart condition just is not with the Lord. So, do they actually know Jesus? Do we actually know Jesus? Make sure that you're confident in that in your walk with the Lord. And the teaching concluded with the comparison of two different types of people. One built their house on a solid foundation upon the rock. He was considered wise. And the second built his house on a faulty foundation, on the sand. He was foolish. And when the storms challenged the world, came upon both of them, one withstood, and the second folded, and it fell. And the fall of the second was great, meaning nearly impossible to recover from it. And the chapter closed with the response from the people Jesus was teaching. They were astonished at his doctrine because he taught with authority and not as the scribes. It says this is a summary of Matthew, of what was going on with this. So as we build our house, we need to do it on the rock. We need to make sure it's a solid foundation. It's not shaky. It's not soft. And again, I believe that happens as we get into Scripture, as we get into God's direction and His promises and His blessings. So every time we read, I believe that puts another stone on that solid foundation that we need. So keep in the Word, keep praying, keep following Jesus. We'll see you in the morning. God bless you.